Please be seated. We remember today Martin Luther King Jr., a light to the world, to use the language of Isaiah, a liberator of our nation, one pointing to Christ, a better way, as John promises us in Jesus. In King's case, pointing to us through our time, to a future we thought we were realizing. On May 17th, 1956, and again on May 17th, 1965, Dr. King preached from this pulpit. Let us remember our history. The Montgomery bus boycott began on December 5th, 1955, a campaign to desegregate Montgomery, Alabama's public buses. Black citizens of Montgomery were 40% of the ridership. This is the famous action initiated by Rosa Parks, who remained seated in the white section of the bus and was arrested. Now, to be clear, many had resisted in this way before, including Pauli Murray in the 1940s. But this time, a young Martin Luther King Jr., pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, led the campaign, coordinated by church folks like you and me and community leaders throughout Montgomery, funded by donations from around the country, including this place. They did the work for over a year, shuttling one another to their workplaces, walking, protesting, sharing food, losing jobs, standing up to violently armed police and vigilante deputies, facing jail and abuse, like Minneapolis today. Our diocesan archivist, Wayne Kempton, recorded King's visit this way. The New York Times described Dr. King's approach as a practical combination of Christ's appeal to love all, a practical application of Hegel's view that development evolves from struggle and that it is natural and necessary to accept the tension of change, and a practical application of Gandhi's passive resistance technique. In February of 1956, Dr. King, preaching on faith in man at his Dexter Avenue Church, said that integration is the great issue of our age. We are in the midst of a great struggle, the consequences of which will be world-shaking. But our victory will not be a victory for Montgomery Negroes alone, he wrote. It will be a victory for justice, a victory for fair play, and a victory for democracy. Dr. King would soon be arrested and charged with conducting an illegal boycott, and on March 22nd, he was found guilty of these charges. This is the year he comes to our cathedral. Dr. King's response to the conviction was, "This will not mar or diminish in any way my interest in the protest. We will continue to protest in the same spirit of nonviolence and passive resistance, using the weapon of love." He would later say that God was using Montgomery as a proving ground. On March 25th, 1956, Dr. King came to New York and was given a hero's welcome at the Concord Baptist Church in Brooklyn. According to the Times, over 2,500 people turned out to hail the boycott leader. In his address, he stressed the Christian basis for the protest. "I come not to bring peace, but the sword," he declared. But the sword was one of nonviolence. "We will not degrade ourselves with hate. We will return good for evil." The next day, the very Reverend James A. Pike, Dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, preaching here, lauded the conduct of Dr. King. "It is a great thing for the Church of God that many of those arrested are ministers of the gospel," Pike said. Dr. King, a Christian minister, is now like his Lord, a convicted criminal. Remember that at the time, King was called a communist by politicians and the media and was being pursued by the FBI. On Thursday, May 17, 1959, Dr. King returned to New York and preached at this cathedral, at a service billed as a national day of prayer and thanksgiving, marking the second anniversary of the Supreme Court decision against segregation in public schools. King tells the biblical story of the Exodus from Egypt, comparing the Israelites' captivity with the plight of African Americans. In quotes, "Many years ago, the Negro was thrown into the Egypt of segregation," he writes, "but through a world-shaking decree by the 9 justices of the Supreme Court of America, the Red Sea was opened and the forces of justice marched through to the other side." King remembered that program as one of the greatest experiences of my life, and Dean Pike called King's sermon the greatest sermon he had ever heard. The service was aired live on WLIB radio, and it is reported that 12,000 people were in attendance here. They must have all been standing, I think. And that same May, later in the month, our bishop, Horace Donegan, Bishop of New York, spoke to the annual convention of the Diocese of New York on equal citizenship, calling it one of the great issues of our time. He said, "I have come to the conclusion that we cannot criticize others without taking seriously our own faults in this regard through the Church, especially in the North. There is only one answer acceptable to God: our humble acknowledgement of our failure in our bearing personal witness to the love of Christ, that same Christ who charged us that we should love one another as he loved us." On November 13th, 1956, almost exactly 1 year after the campaign began, the United States Supreme Court decided that interstate bus segregation was unconstitutional and ordered it ended in Montgomery. King was here in the midst of the Montgomery bus boycott to mark the second anniversary of school desegregation, being violently fought out in our schools all over this country at the time. And many of our current political leaders recall being children of that generation of the beginning of school desegregation. Some of you will remember the bitterly contested fight that civil rights was and has now come back around to being. This is the struggle of our time as well. People are being stopped on our streets, sought out in their homes by the sound of their names and the look of their faces, the shade of brown of their skin. Confusingly, often by people who look a lot like them, but took that job. It is racial equality, a diverse and proud nation with liberty and justice for all, that is being contested in Minnesota. Because the American project has always been about defining who is included in the all. On May 17, 1965, at another service of remembrance of school desegregation, at the invitation of then Dean Butler of this cathedral, King preached again from this pulpit. What begins as a playful sermon claiming to have found a new letter of Paul written to the Americans. Now we'll share these sermons because they're wonderful. He preaches that after the hard work of the translation from the Greek of this text that he had found, he will read it to us here, an excerpt from the letter of Paul to the Americans. So just a quote. "Through your scientific and technological genius, you have made the world a neighborhood. And you have not yet, through your moral commitment, made of it," and his word is, "a brotherhood. And I would urge you American Christians to bridge the gulf between your scientific and technological progress and your moral progress. I'm impelled to write you concerning the responsibility laid upon you to live as Christians in an unchristian world. This is what I had to do, and this is what every Christian has to do, and I understand that all too many Christians among you are more concerned about adjusting themselves to human-made customs and systems. They are afraid to be different. They live by some such ethic as this: everybody is doing it, so it must be all right. So in many instances, you have reduced morality to group consensus. You have come to feel that you discover what is right by taking a Gallup poll of the majority opinion. But I must say to you American Christians, as I said to the Roman Christians, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds. As I said to the Christians at Philippi, you are a colony of heaven. This means that although you live in the colony of time, your ultimate allegiance is to the empire of eternity. You have a dual citizenry. You live both in time and eternity, both in heaven and earth. Your ultimate allegiance is not to the state. Your ultimate allegiance is not to the government. Your ultimate allegiance is not to any human-made system. Your ultimate allegiance is to the Almighty God, come what may. I would urge you to see this, American Christians. A decade of fighting for equality of this nation, a decade of preaching from pulpits like ours, a Christianity that called the United States to faithfulness, to the language of its founding and aspirations, and Christians to the courage of our calling, a decade. Friends, we remain in this struggle today. White nationalists have never let up, a small minority of us, but ascendant and powerful in our times. Many of you, like me, cannot believe this is happening out in the open, supported by our tax dollars and called legal, but it is. And we have been in times like this before, and maybe it is most of the time. In Minnesota, neighbors are supporting one another, risking everything together, everything. In America, we know is who we can be, free of the manipulation of media and politics, free from the horrors of hate, informed by our shameful history, but neighbors to one another. Let us be encouraged that we stand in this awesome tradition of struggle, right here. Feel the power in these stones and in you. Bishop Donegan said we must be convicted of our failure to love one another as Christ has loved us. I got back Friday from a trip to India, to South India, and I'll have more to say about that on a day that is not MLK Sunday. But one of the things we did was to follow the stories of the Apostle Thomas in Kerala and Chennai, where it is said that he went, with some interjection of Dr. King's trip to India in 1959, to learn with the leaders of a new India in the midst of the struggle for civil rights in this country. He concludes his journey in South India with a visit to Cape Comorin called Kanyakumari today. And these are his words from his journal and from a sermon at Ebenezer. On February 22nd, Mrs. King and I journeyed down to a city in India called Trivandrum. Then we went from Trivandrum down to a point known as Cape Comorin. This is where the mass of India ends, and the vast rolling waters of the ocean have their beginning. It is one of the most beautiful parts of all the world, he writes. 3 great bodies of water meet together in all of their majestic splendor: the Bay of Bengal, the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean. I remember how we went out there and looked at the big old rocks, a sight that was truly incredible, out into the waters, out into the ocean. Seated on a huge rock that slightly protruded into the ocean, we were enthralled by the vastness of the ocean and its terrifying immensities. We looked at the waves of those great bodies of water as they unfolded in almost rhythmic suspension, as the waves crashed against the base of the rock on which we were seated. An oceanic music brought sweetness to the ear. To the west, we saw the magnificent sun, a red cosmic ball of fire, appear to sink into the very ocean itself. Just as it was almost lost from sight, Coretta touched me and said, "Look, Martin, isn't that beautiful?" I looked around and saw the moon, another ball of scintillating beauty. As the sun appeared to be sinking into the ocean, the moon appeared to be rising from the ocean. When the sun finally passed completely beyond sight, darkness engulfed the earth. But in the east, the radiant light of the rising moon shone supreme. This was, as I said, one of the most beautiful parts in all the world. And that happened to be one of those days when the moon was full. This is one of the few points in all the world where you can see the setting of the sun and the rising of the moon simultaneously. I looked at that and something came to my mind, and I had to share it with Coretta and Dr. Reddick and other people who were accompanying us around at that point. God has the light that can shine through all the darkness. We have experiences when the light of day vanishes, leaving us in some dark and desolate midnight moments, when our highest hopes are turned into shambles of despair, or when we are victims of some tragic injustice and some terrible exploitation. During such moments, our spirits are almost overcome by gloom and despair, and we feel that there is no light anywhere. But ever again, we look toward the east and discover that there is another light which shines even in the darkness, and the spear of frustration is transformed into a shaft of light. Friends, as international conflict looms, violence grows in our streets, our neighbors fear detention, as we find our way to stand up as citizens for a broad, diverse, just, and equitable United States, as we find our Christian voices and actions as citizens of God's reign of love and justice and mercy and hope. Let us look today to one who was sent to us, knit in the womb of Black America, beloved of God. Let us rejoice in the relentless, brilliant, and faithful witness of our brother, a light to the nations, a light for our journey. Blessed Martin, pray for us.